First Power 5 opponent, first road game. We get down to business. Oklahoma taking on Nebraska on Saturday. Welcome to Oklahoma Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football, 78th edition, Nebraska week. And Jason Ray's, of course, here to break it down for us. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Mark. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Doing great. Good to see you. Of course, everybody can join Jason not only here every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, but after each and every Oklahoma game for a second consecutive season. And Jason will be all fired up and ready to go after the game against Nebraska, one of those big noon kickoffs that's big 11 a.m. in the Midwest.
Yeah, no, I think, and maybe this is a good situation for Oklahoma coming into Nebraska playing at an 11 a.m. game. But you say that, but Texas was their crowd was really really good on Saturday against Alabama. But I think even though Nebraska's a name, obviously, and Oklahoma's a name coming into Nebraska, I think Alabama brings a little bit more clout. Probably coming to your stadium, especially for a team like Texas that's trying to make their way back. But there's going to be a great atmosphere and very bizarre, I think, headlines coming into this game. At least, particularly on the Nebraska side, but even Oklahoma, that you don't really have a great feel on what either of these teams are going to to provide on Saturday. So it'll be a bit interesting to break it down.
You made mention to me before we started something that we talked about on our Nebraska show last night in regards to the emotional dynamic, the motivational dynamic of a longtime head coach at this point, 5 years, Scott Frost, relieved of his duties, and then you bring in Mickey Joseph, who is already part of the coaching staff and familiar to the team and so forth. But where that dynamic goes, your thought, if I read it correctly, was the same as mine, that there typically is at least a temporary jolt of enthusiasm, energy, if the coach is able to sell it well. Us against the world, nobody thinks we can do anything, nobody's expecting us to do anything, and it's a clear path in terms of a direction, and a goal, and a cry. What do they call that? Like a fight
Right.
mantra. Anyway, but on top of that, the one thing I'll say, Jason, before I cut you loose here, is that even in more so in this situation, because of Scott Frost and because of everything that the players have had to listen to for not just this season, but going back to last season and before that, your coach is on the hot seat. Maybe you should be fired. He did this wrong, he did that wrong, and maybe just getting past all that, saying, okay, well, it finally happened, whether I agree with it personally as a player or not, or I really liked my coach, or maybe I'm okay with this. Regardless, it's behind us, it's over, and we kind of have this fresh start.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. I mean, I'm kind of reminded, obviously, with Bob Stoops in the bowl game last year, how that ended up. But I think a few years ago when Mike Stoops was relieved of his duties from a defensive coordinator perspective, and Ruffin McNeil took that spot, the team played a little bit better defensively for a couple of weeks, and then they came back down to earth, and they were about as bad as they had been under Mike for the rest of the year. So I think I certainly absolutely agree with your with your commentary, which is very consistent with mine in terms of there's a little bit of energy that's going to be that's going to be brought into this Nebraska team this weekend. Now, whether or not it's good enough for them to challenge Oklahoma in the way that they thought that they would be able to open the year, that remains to be seen. There's an element watching. I watched it was I think it was an hour later than the Oklahoma game, but was watching that game, and Mark, I saw a team out of Nebraska that not necessarily on the offensive side of the ball, but on the defensive side of the ball that wasn't in any way, shape, or form interested in playing that game. So whether it's the players quit on him or what, I mean, you give up almost 700 yards of total offense to Georgia Southern, you've got some problems on defense. Whether it's scheme, whether it's players, whether it's coaching, whether it's mentality, whatever that is, you've got some problems. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think it's a benefit for Nebraska coming into this game that Frost is gone. Honestly, I think there would always be a little bit of extra motivation with a team like Oklahoma coming into Lincoln. Sure, a nationally top 10 team, and with the rivalry that has been. I mean, most of these kids don't know anything about this rivalry, um, but just being told that all week, and so I think it gives Nebraska probably a better chance than they would have previously. If Frost is still here till the October 1st deadline, right? And he's there, but give credit to Trev Alberts. He made the decision. Obviously, he knew that it was going to be a substantial financial decision. So to make this move right now, so I think it's really depending on the mindset of these kids, right? I mean, this is another thing that we talked about. What was the locker room like? Does the locker room love? This also reminds me of John Blake. If you 20 or so years ago, like I think the locker room was split. They really loved John Blake, but at the end of the day, they wanted to be able to. They loved playing for him, but they wanted to be able to win. And they couldn't continue to throw out these 3-8, 3-9, 5-6, 5-7 seasons. So, do these kids come into this game? To your point, have renewed energy, renewed focus with someone else like Mickey Joseph involved um, in this game, or in the rest of this season, or is there a lot of split in the locker room related to some of these kids are still angry that they let Scott Frost go in the manner that he did, and to be honest, before they named, and obviously I don't follow Nebraska as close, but I didn't even realize that Mickey Joseph was on the on the coaching staff, and I think maybe just joined this year. Is that right?
Yes.
That's what I'd heard. And when I think, of course, I'm not obviously like super old, but when I think of Mickey Joseph, I remember I believe it was the 1995 game where he broke his leg against Oklahoma. One of the only, I think it was the only win that Gary Gibbs got over Nebraska when he was there, 45-10 in 1995. But I regress. But yeah, it'll be like I said, it'll be interesting in the mindset of Nebraska coming into this game. Obviously, there'll be a bolt of energy. Now, I think what will happen is I'm sorry, I said 1995, 1990. And I think a bolt of that energy. But if they get down a little bit early, then that's where it might. I think that's where it might be a little bit interesting to see how they react to that.
The other added boost of confidence, in addition to what we're talking about and being just generally relieved and taking all that air and all that pressure out of the room that was there with the speculation concerning their head coach and that being behind them, is this is not, in Nebraska's eyes, Oklahoma playoff contender every year, us 3-9 team. This looks like a daunting task. They've been on the field with these guys. They were just on the field with them last year on the road, and it was a fairly close game. By the indication of the score, it was an extremely close game. It was a one-score game. Now, having watched the game, I think that Oklahoma was clearly the better team, but because of circumstances and the way the game played out, Nebraska stayed in the game. So, and then on top of that, they've got a quarterback who threw 5 touchdowns against this team last year. So you would think that would add to the level of confidence.
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely would have confidence coming into this game. To your point on how they played, And maybe if you're scoreboard watching to a certain extent, and you look at, with 1 minute to go in the first half, Kent State's up on Oklahoma 3-0, or 2 minutes to go, I should say. So I think maybe you have some optimism as far as that goes. And yeah, when you put everything in perspective with how Casey Thompson played against Oklahoma last year, and in those types of things, and how close the game was, then yeah, you've got some confidence coming into this game. And I think also what you have confidence in this year is the Nebraska offense it's performed fairly well, right? I mean, they've been inconsistent, but they've had moments where they've been pretty solid, offensively. And you've got good talent when you look at Casey Thompson, then when you look at Anthony Grant, from a running back perspective, and then Trey Palmer is your primary wide receiver outside for Nebraska. And you've got then you've got that interesting matchup between Mark Whipple and Brent Venables, which they both know each other, fairly well. So I think that's going to be the most interesting, I think, aspect of this game, is Nebraska's offense against Oklahoma's improved defense.
Yeah, I didn't even take it that next step to relate what you just pointed out. Mark Whipple, offensive coordinator at Pitt last year, Clemson defensive coordinator Brent Venables. They matched up in the regular season last year, and Pitt won the ball game at home, I believe 27-17, if memory serves me right. And but they, it's only been a one season removed since a Venables Whipple matchup. Greg Peterson from Husker Online will be joining us at some point during the hour to give us the Nebraska perspective here. And as we did last night with the Nebraska show, we simulcasted on the Oklahoma channel, doing the same here with the Oklahoma show on the Nebraska channel. So welcome, Husker fans. If you have any interest, we are here every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time with our Oklahoma show here each and every week that we've done 79 consecutive weeks with Jason, and thanks to Jason for being here. Otherwise, we don't have a show. So we appreciate Jason, of course. Well, if we take it back to the Kent State game and the Golden Flashes, the mighty Golden Flashes, where's my helmet? Yes. I was just talking to a Georgia guest, and we were doing a look at Georgia, and they've got Kent State coming up in a couple of weeks. And I warned them about the mighty Golden Flashes. But a quick 3 on the board for Kent State, and then it was all Oklahoma from there with 33 on the board. Your takeaways, anything meaningful from the Kent State game?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think there was some meaningful things that you take away from that. As I mentioned to you, I think last week, Mark, when you talk about, game one, there's some things, and you would expect some improvement from game one to game two, and whether it's an individual or a unit or one side of the ball or the entire team. I think what for me and for some, it's not as big of a concern, and so we'll see. I mean, it's not anything that any fan should panic, but I think there's some concern that needs to be at least brought up or understood around Oklahoma's offensive line right now. There's two, they weren't bad against UTEP, ran for a little bit over 250 yards, but there was times where they weren't able to push the defensive line off the ball from time to time. And so you bring that forward 1 week, and the offensive line, the first half was just bad. It was just bad. Oklahoma had 7 rushing yards at halftime. They weren't able to get anything consistently going in terms of a drive until that last 2 minutes of the game, or 2 minutes of the half, when they had that 2-minute drill where they scored that touchdown, the long touchdown to Marvin Mims. But I think that's something that's of concern. Now, I think there's some things that you can take solace in if you're an Oklahoma fan. Obviously, this is a new offense, a new scheme, a new blocking mentality and scheme from that perspective. So I think that's something that obviously can be considered. You've got Wanye Morris, who was out, and because of that you've shifted players into certain positions. that maybe they weren't ready for or not comfortable in. So Wanye Morris should be back for Oklahoma this week. So we'll see how that continues to go. I mean, I think it was from, I think teams were really just kind of taking turns, right? I mean, some of these players were taking turns not doing their job. So I think, and this is the time, this is what's happening with Oklahoma's offensive line seems to be over the last few years as they struggle up front early on, and then they start to kind of get it going, later in the season. But don't have a ton of respect, at least at this point, for this Nebraska defense. Now, maybe it can be a little bit better, but from what I've seen over 3 games, hasn't played extremely well. So I think they're going to they're going to have much better athletes than UTEP and Kent State did, but then they got it going. Oklahoma got it going there in the second half. Played really, really well from that end of the second quarter till through the end of the third. Had an opportunity to get it up into 40 points, but lost a little bit of their mentality there towards the fourth quarter. So, and I think the one thing that you can continue to be happy about is the way the defense is playing. They missed some tackles in the open field, but and I saw the stat, I'm trying to remember when the first time that Oklahoma had held an FBS team without a touchdown in a game in 5-10 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. So they continue to play well. They're blocking well. They're tackling well. Had a couple of times where they missed a couple of tackles, but I think they've played much, much better defensively, and they've still not really shown anything, Mark. They still have been very base in their coverage, and the defensive line seems to be getting better and better over these first couple of weeks, and then you look at they're playing well at all layers in the defense. Billy Bowman's playing extremely well from a safety perspective. Then you got Danny Stutzman's playing well, and then Reggie Grimes is continuing to play really, really well. So they're in the for once, Oklahoma, and it's 2 games, and it's against 2 subpar opponents, but they performed at the level that they need to, and now you've got a really big jump in terms of playmaking ability on the offensive side. So I think you're happy with the defense. I think the offense continues to be one of those offenses right now, Mark, where they are really, really good in stretches, and then they are really average in stretches. They started off the game extremely hot against UTEP, and then, kind of middle second quarter, middle third quarter, they kind of went into a little bit of a lull, and had some breakdowns and blocking and protection and things like that. And so, and then obviously you saw the same thing for a majority of the first half against Kent State. So I think that's not going to be something that I think that you'll continue to see. I think it's supposed to it'll get better and better in terms of that consistency on the offensive side of the ball. But right now it's a little bit inconsistent, and you can't have when you're playing on the road, particularly when you're playing on the road against in a hostile environment against a really good team, then you have you can't have a quarter or half a quarter where you're going 3 and out. And if you're running as fast as Oklahoma runs offensively, then you have to be able to sustain those drives and that through a 4-quarter game.
A lot of different comments about some things that didn't go right against Kent State early in the game, just scoring the 1 touchdown late in the first half. James says Kent State was confusing the offensive line with their run fits. They didn't do much straight up beating the line.
Well, I think what was happening a lot, and as I watched it, there was just Oklahoma wasn't pushing them off the ball, as much as you'd like to see out of the offensive line. And a lot of times you would see, and this is very similar, listening to Gabe Eichert, you saw that a lot last year, where the offensive line just really wasn't really knowing who they were supposed to be blocking in the scheme. A lot of times they left an unblocked linebacker, and that's the guy who was making the play, in the hole. So I think that continues to be a little bit of a concern, just understanding. And this scheme is much, much more simplified than what Lincoln Riley's scheme was. So the fact that they're still having struggles, um, being able to know, where their keys are, and where they're working to, so to speak, from a blocking scheme is something that's concerning. And I don't think I think the one thing that you see that's not as big of a concern as maybe it's been in the past is just they don't have the strength up front. I think Rame is doing a lot better with his strength. I think overall they're a lot better, and so there's some cohesion that comes in with the offensive line that you have to understand. Obviously, with new players, coming in, obviously with McCabe Matower as well. So I think that's something that you'll continue to see them get better at. And I know that Caleb Williams and Caleb Williams helped, kind of mask some of those issues from an offensive line with his ability to, to move and be mobile in the pocket, and then Kennedy Brooks with the patience that he had from from a running back perspective as well. So we'll see how that continues to go. I think the one thing that you see is both Eric Gray and Marcus Major are running the ball really well. Marcus Major might be the better of the two, just in terms of a pure running back. And so we'll see how that continues to go throughout the rest of the year. If you see Marcus Major get some more of those carries in the inside zone scheme, and then you have Eric Gray more of a two, but he's more of a kind of a threat out of the backfield from that type of situation. And I think one of the most intriguing parts of this game is just to see what Oklahoma has held back on both sides of the ball, where some teams, like particularly in Nebraska, didn't necessarily have the the same luxury of being able to hold some of their stuff back and things like that. So that'll be something that's really interesting to watch on Saturday, to see how much Oklahoma has held back on both sides of the ball.
Well, Jason, the chat is extremely hard on the offensive line in terms of not getting the push, being too weak, not getting the job done, needing a new offensive line coach, all of those things.
Yeah, no, you got it. I mean, I think like I said, the concerning thing for me is, and it's not panic or by any stretch of the imagination, because you still have the opportunity to get much better through a season. But I think the concern now is at least right now, this is the third year in a row that this team has had at least through two games here, a little bit of a subpar offensive line performance related to how they have been, in the past, in the 2017, 2018, 2019 season. So we'll see how that continues to go, but I think that trajectory is what causes concern, certainly from some of those for some Oklahoma fans.
Oklahoma Sooners Live here every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. We welcome our Nebraska folks there on the Nebraska channel. Huskers and Sooners, longtime rivals, get back together for a second consecutive year, this time in Lincoln for the big noon kickoff, 11 a.m., of course, Central Time. Join us on Discord. You can talk Sooners, Huskers, college football all the time. Go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV, sign up right there. We give you a Discord link, and you can talk college football in a chat room similar to what you're experiencing right now all the time. And if you ask anybody that is part of our Voice of College Football community, they will vouch for how fun it is, how interactive, and so forth. So please join us there. So Jason, I'll hit you with this. It's only been two games, and it's only been inferior opponents, but is there anybody that has stood out to you on either side of the ball, and not necessarily in some kind of starring role or starting role, but anybody who's gained some reps that you think has made an impact and could factor into the season maybe a little bit more than you anticipated?
Yeah, we could start just from a team perspective on the offensive side of the ball. I think the good thing is, and I saw a stat that this hasn't happened in quite some time, is Oklahoma's went through 2 games with they haven't turned the ball over a single time. So being able to protect the ball, I think, has been a really good thing. So I think on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, it's kind of funny. There's obviously in every fan base, there's armchair quarterbacks out there, right? That are specifically at the quarterback position that's going to challenge, um, everything that goes on. And I think Oklahoma has a standard that quarterbacks just really Oklahoma fans, I should say, have a standard that quarterbacks are. It's hard for them to live up to, right? But I think Dylan Gabriel has done fine. I think I mean, he's done really well. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, hasn't even really come close to an interception. So I think he's performing the way that I and everyone else, and at least nationally, anticipated him, being able to play. So I think he's one that continues to obviously play well. Marcus Major, I think, is really made a big move, and really presented himself with an opportunity to be more of a get more carries, at least even number of carries with Eric Gray. Um, and it's not really a surprise, Mark, but Marvin Mims has been the best, obviously the best wide receiver on this team. But I think Theo Weiss has played well. He hasn't got a ton of opportunities, but I think he's really played well. On the defensive side of the ball, Reggie Grimes is mentioned here. Yeah, he's performed extremely well from a defensive lineman already. I think he's not necessarily came out of nowhere. I think he's a guy that Oklahoma people thought that he had an opportunity um, to have a good year, but I think 4.5 sacks in 2 games is not something that anyone really anticipated. So he's a guy. Isaiah Coe played really well in the middle, and then he got his first start there. I mean, I think it's not necessarily a surprise, but Danny Stutzman playing really well at the linebacker spot. And I think we talked about Billy Bowman. Bowman is a guy that a lot of people didn't necessarily know what to think, and we've talked about this a lot, but he's unfortunately had situations where he has not, he's not had consistency because he's had to move from, different spots. He was played safety, played nickel, played corner a little bit, and lost a lot of confidence, but he's playing really, really well at that safety position this year. Helped force a fumble in that last game. And then there's a lot of skepticism on Jaden Davis, but he's played pretty well so far. Oklahoma's not really given up much in the pass game, which you like. They've even playing a base defense, they've not really given up any large plays. I think they 24 yards is the most the most yardage in one particular play, so not a lot of chunk plays. So yeah, I think those are some of the guys that I think that at least initially I think you'd like to see on the offensive side of the ball. Jalil Farouk be able to make a little bit more of a impact in terms of that. Braden Willis, is blocking really, really well. Had a couple of drops, but I think he can continue to be a big part of this offense for Oklahoma as well. And then just interesting, I mean, Jaron Kanik is not really playing a ton, but he's playing, in kind of some of the garbage time, and he's playing really, really well when he's in there. So he's a guy that might work his way into the rotation, mid to later in the season. But he's a guy that's probably off radar a little bit. But if he continues to play as well as he's playing in these, because Oklahoma's really not missing a beat defensively in the first couple of games when they brought him in. So I think he might be playing himself into a more of a focal role within this offense.
I guess on a day when Oklahoma could have played better, could have jumped out early like many people expect, and only had 7 points at halftime, a 7-3 lead, and then it took until the third quarter to break away. All you have to do is look around college football and see that it could be worse. Texas A&M going down, Notre Dame going down, Nebraska going down, all 2 group of 5 teams and Wisconsin getting upset as a 18-point favorite. So they made it through, and they gave up 3-12 these first two games. So a pretty stark contrast to at least the Tulane game, if you want to make a comparison to last year. And
Yeah, I think no, that's absolutely right. And I think it was impressive. I mean, not that they struggled defensively in the first half, but I think the first half they weren't really able to get off the field a ton on third down. Now they were able to. I think they forced a missed field goal and then one field goal for Kent State, but they didn't perform particularly well on third down. And Venables mentioned that at halftime as he was talking to the sideline reporter that the Oklahoma Kent State was 6 for 12 on third down in the first half, and then in the second half they were 0 for 5. So obviously they got less opportunities, and then certainly Oklahoma was able to force a fourth down in every one of those opportunities. So they continued to play really, really well. And I think this is a team that's obviously going to continue to get better and better on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, the stats may not necessarily look the same way, just in terms of, points given up. You can't expect to give up 3 points a game and against any of these teams. Kansas is it's not a pushover game anymore, right? At least initially, the way it looks like right now. It's not a game that you can automatically go in and chalk that up to a win. So you've got good teams and good offenses all across the board. So I think this consistent play early on will continue to set them apart and let them be a much more prolific defense through the remainder of the year.
Nebraska, Oklahoma, they played in Norman, of course, last year. Lincoln coming up on Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Time, one of the great rivalries in college football. We got the Nebraska side, Greg Peterson, Husker Online. Greg, how's it going?
Going pretty good. How about you guys?
Doing well.
Good.
Greg, we understand. I know that word's not gotten out there much, so we're probably breaking this for a lot of people, but that you've got a new head coach.
Yeah, you can say that.
Okay. Got an interim coach. The coach is gone. Yeah, Scott Frost, of course, let go. And Mickey Joseph and Jason and I were just kind of cutting up as we did last night, of course, on our Nebraska show with Greg about the impact that Mickey Joseph's going to have on this team. And you're much closer to the situation than we are and interact with these guys on basically a daily basis. And Mickey Joseph is just a guy that's to be respected and admired by the players there. So this could be a pretty positive impact.
Yeah, and I expect it to be, compared to the previous 3 weeks. Mickey is definitely a motivator, and, he knows this university well. He played here. He played against Oklahoma in his college days. And, so this game brings back a lot of memories for him, and I'm sure that he's going to instill that in his players. And I expect them to be ready to go and probably be more fired up than they have been all season. Because, I think we've talked a couple times on our show, Mark, that a lot of times there just wasn't a lot of juice out there in the last couple of home games. And it's kind of disturbing at times.
I'll ask one other question and then cut Jason loose here on the Oklahoma matchup with the Huskers. But we even beyond there being the typical, okay, coach gets fired, interim coach comes in, can he rally the troops, get them to, what term I was looking for before, Jason, was battle cry. I was searching all around for battle cry. That's what I was looking for. Can he kind of fire up the battle cry? Even more than your typical coaching transition. I think this is one where the players may be even more relieved than usual, because this buildup about Scott Frost and all the turmoil, for as much as I'm sure they've tried to and been successful, maybe shutting that out of the room. Man, this has been swirling around this program for a long time. And now finally, whether they individually supported Scott Frost or not, they know that they need to move on. And it seems like there's probably a lot of pressure taken off of this team.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it has been really tough on the players. I mean, obviously they love their head coach. The guy that recruited them is now no longer their coach. And Mickey Joseph's, he's in his first year here, but he is a guy that, was like I said, he was no stranger to the program. And I mean, he stepped in, I think, day one and demanded respect from not just his wide receiver room, but the entire team. And it's been well known and well documented how much the players love, Mickey Joseph's, fire and intensity, and he comes from a football family, and like we mentioned last night, that this is not just your typical interim head coach. 2 games finishing out the year. I mean, he's got 9 games to prove himself, and right now you throw everything away that happened in the first 3 weeks, and it's a fresh start. And like I mentioned, I think you're going to see a different attitude out of the team, but how that translates on the field, I don't know. Especially on the defensive side of the ball, because obviously Mickey is an offensive guy. But like he mentioned in his press conference yesterday, that a head coach, a good head coach, he pointed out like his brother that played quarterback in college and then played defensive back in the NFL. And that's why he's a defensive coordinator in the NFL and a former head coach in the NFL. And so being an offensive guy means that you need to know both sides of the ball. And he's a pretty knowledgeable guy when it comes to football.
Jason, anything you'd like to hit on concerning the matchup?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting. Oklahoma over the last few years, of course, two game into the season, but over the last 10, 12 years, Oklahoma has not consistently played well on the defensive side of the ball, and so they seem to be much improved early on in the season. But for me, I think the biggest matchup here is Oklahoma's offense against Nebraska's defense. I think that's at least for me most intriguing, because Oklahoma has not probably played as well offensively through 2 games as some would expect, at least in the Oklahoma camp. And obviously Nebraska struggled on the defensive side, almost giving up 700 yards of total offense to Georgia Southern, which was just shocking to me. So give me a little bit. Yeah. So give me a little where do you think this defense is? Do you think, obviously I know Mickey Joseph's more on the offensive side of the ball, but was that just an aberration? Do you think that's how this team is performing on the defensive side of the ball? Do you feel like that jolt of energy with having Mickey Joseph kind of permeates to that side of the ball and allows this team to play maybe a little bit more emotional and better on the defensive side this week?
The defense is the biggest question mark. Like, you mentioned, they gave up a record amount of yards inside Memorial Stadium, and we're talking hundreds of years, over 100 years here. And that's the most shocking thing to all of us here, is the way the defense has performed. And, just having a head coaching change, that doesn't fix missed tackles. They said that they want to play faster. To me, that's just kind of I don't really understand. I mean, aren't you trying to play as fast as you possibly can already? In my mind, when they say that, but obviously tackling has been one of the biggest issues, and then and the line of scrimmage has just been horrible. Teams have tried to get the ball out quick against Nebraska and not let their pass rush be effective, and then they're chipping the edges, and so people have come in and game planned very well against Nebraska, and we're talking about a defense that was actually very successful the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And it's a head scratcher, it really is. But the defensive coaching staff is still in place. There's a few changes being made where defensive coordinator Eric Shenander's taking a hands-on with the safety group now, and kind of relieving Travis Fisher of having to coach both, the corners and the safeties and the nickels. So that's going to be a little bit of a change there. Maybe some more specialized deals, but bottom line is that front seven has got to start producing, and stop getting blown off the line of scrimmage. And I mean, if I'm an Oklahoma skill guy and a lineman, I'm drooling to go play against this defense right now because they are horrible right now. And I was joking last week, in the first half against Georgia Southern, I go, Oklahoma's going to hang half 100 on Nebraska in the first half next week if they keep playing like this. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously the offense is playing well, and I think they'll be able to score against Oklahoma. But yeah, the defense is the biggest question mark. Is can you get off the field against a high-powered offense like Oklahoma?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How do you got to have a lot of respect for what Nebraska's being able to do on the offensive side of the ball? Casey Thompson played extremely well against Oklahoma last year with 5 touchdowns in the Red River game, and I know he's thrown a couple of ill-advised or untimely interceptions this year, but still, I think is a significant upgrade from Adrian Martinez last year. And then, Anthony Grant almost 500 yards already, in just a few games here. So tell me what you like about the matchup with Nebraska's offense going against Oklahoma's defense.
Well, right now, I mean, they started to run the ball, which has been key. And you mentioned Anthony Grant, who's a guy that has been through it all. Started out at Florida State and basically was shown the door when a new coaching staff ended. And he went to Garden City, Kansas JUCO, and things didn't work out there. And he ended up at New Mexico Military and was the number 1 JUCO player in the country last year and didn't
hopefully.
And the guy has already shown that he's probably going to be over 1,000 yards pretty easily here, and has really turned into a spectacular running back. And then AJ Allen behind him as a freshman is also a really good looking back. So Nebraska's got the running game going right now, and with some of the threats they have at the wide receiver position. And hopefully they can get Travis Volkolek back at tight end, who's a game changer. And that's the key. I mean, right now he's day by day, so we don't really know if he's going to play or not. But we haven't seen him play yet since he went out game 1 over in Dublin against Northwestern, which kind of changed the game for Nebraska. They couldn't get any more first downs in that game, and ended up not being able to score again. Northwestern came back and beat them. So, that's a big key to this offense. If Travis Volkolek plays, I think Nebraska, their offense even takes another step forward here Saturday morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an intriguing matchup for me. I mean, I think, and you can play, you don't really necessarily know the mentality. I think that's the key thing here, the mentality of Nebraska coming in here. Are the players, how do the players respond to Mickey Joseph? Are they still a little bit disappointed that Frost is gone? Are they happy he's gone? Is that, what does that bring? I think coming into it, and me and Mark had talked about this, I think I was a little bit more confident in Oklahoma's ability to win this game fairly easily with Frost. Now you throw this in there, and it's a little bit, and not necessarily from a coaching perspective, but just more so on the defensive side of the ball. If anything else, I mean, you can't tell me that the athletes at Nebraska are not good enough to hold Georgia Southern to less than what they did, right? So I know that you have the players and have the athletes, so maybe it's an element of just not wanting to play for Scott Frost. So now you bring in someone else, and that's a little bit of a wild card situation. So it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, I think the start for both teams will obviously be very interesting, because if Oklahoma gets up to a 10, 14 point first quarter lead, then maybe some of those feelings kind of come back. Like, what are we doing? Hey, this is all over again. Now, if Nebraska's right there, or if it's if they take a little bit of a lead early on, then you've got all that momentum and you've got the crowd behind you. So very, very interesting to see how this game turns out.
And I mean, last week's game against Georgia Southern was also the first the first 2 games of the season, Nebraska scored a touchdown on their opening possession in the game. And they did not do that. They went 3 and out against Georgia Southern, and Georgia Southern came down, with like an 18-play drive and punched it into the end zone. And so it kind of changed that whole dynamic of that game right off. So, yeah, no, getting to a fast start is definitely a big key for Nebraska and going to be a key for their attitude of how the rest of that game unfolds. And obviously, it's been rough on the players. I mean, in this day and age, you can't hide from the rumors and the media and the fans on social media. They know how much their head coach was under the hot seat going into the season, and yeah, I mean, it's finally over with. Unfortunately, these guys don't have a lot of time to dwell on things. You got a game against a top 10 team in the country and an arch rival. And it's the next game up mentality. You have to have that to be successful in this sport. And I think all these young men they've handled it, as far as we've heard, is they've handled it like champs. And it's all business. So hopefully that carries over and with a fresh voice leading the way. Like I said earlier, it's a fresh slate. Everything that's happened previously has been forgotten. So, you know what? This is game 1 for Nebraska right now. And, you got a stiff test, obviously. And it's a good thing it's at home. And because the Nebraska fan base probably, I might have been a little bit worried if Scott Frost was still the head coach, but I think you're going to see a big time packed house now, and a lot of those Oklahoma fans that were coming up here thinking they might be able to get a pretty cheap ticket here on game day, those might not be available now, since a large part of this fan base that's been calling for Scott Frost's head has now gotten their way, and I'm not I'm not trying to say anything bad about Scott Frost. I wanted it to work out for him. I think we all did. And unfortunately, the record speaks for itself, and it was time for a change.
Everybody can join Greg on HuskerOnline.com, Husker Online video right here on YouTube. And Greg, really the last thing I have, and then I'll leave it up to Jason if he's got anything else for you, is just regarding the program and Mickey Joseph's role now going forward through the rest of the season of just not trying to maintain a team that, hey, mathematically speaking, is in play to gun for the Big Ten Western Division title. They've only played 1 conference game. They lost it, close game, but they've got all the contenders in the Big Ten West right there in front of them to pick off. But in regards to this is not the way it's typically done in college football. It's even if you're having a disappointing season, even though the writing's on the wall, the coach finishes out the year. Then that Sunday, right after the last game on Saturday, Black Sunday, boom, we see about 12 coaches fired. But we saw it with USC and Lincoln Riley last year, or with Clay Helton fired after 2 or 3, 4 games, something in that range, of just about the same.
Ironically, who just beat Nebraska on Saturday.
Now we see it with Scott Frost. So for the interim coach, it's not just coaching the football team, but there's a recruiting class to bring in December. You're very close to recruiting. You've gone on recruiting trips for a long, long time and been involved in covering recruiting. How much of a challenge is it for an interim coach to try to keep that class and add to it before December?
Well, actually, I mean, it's funny that you asked that, because we actually, Brian Munson had a story on that. Mickey has come right in here and really taken recruiting by the reins, and Scott Frost's recruiting wasn't really that good, especially with the in-state recruiting. And so Mickey, all of a sudden, he took over Omaha and Lincoln and immediately opened up all those lines of communication and with all of the local area, especially the Omaha metro area, coaches and players, where they kind of had felt a little bit shut out under the Scott Frost, before Mickey Joseph had got here. So he'd already influenced this in that way, and plus with all his ties to the state of Louisiana, and then you add the ties with Brian Applewhite in Texas, the running backs coach, that they've already opened up a lot of new avenues in recruiting, and we've seen a big step up already in this season's class. And, the key is to keep a lot, and it's more the out-of-state guys. And then you're also interested right now, which is another side note to this game, the number one player in the state of Nebraska, Malachi Coleman, probably coming down between Nebraska and Oklahoma for his decision coming up here in October. And there was actually a tweet out today, number one versus number one, head-to-head for Malachi Coleman. So, yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics going on here, and obviously recruiting is a big part of it, and Nebraska's already locked up most of the top players in the state, and they're all friends with Malachi, and they've all been working on him, and Malachi's a mainstay here on Saturdays at Nebraska games. So this is a big one when you're talking recruiting, and I think recruiting can only go up for Nebraska now that these changes have been made, and then we'll see. If there's a whole new recruiting staff or a whole new staff that comes in next season, then all bets are off, and we're probably starting all over again. But no, right now they're actually in a very strong position right now.
All right, Jason. Anything else for Greg?
No, I don't think so. I was gonna. I'm glad you mentioned Malachi Coleman, because that was going to be the question that I asked. I mean, I think it's. I don't know. I don't know what the determining factor is going to be with that kid between Oklahoma and Nebraska. I don't know. I don't know if the win, whoever wins this game has a little bit of an upper hand or whatever that looks like. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Oklahoma likes right now where they're at with him, and I'm sure Nebraska feels the same way. So I think that will be interesting to see how that continues to work out, and if whoever wins this game, if that gives them a little bit of an edge.
And the head coach now is the coach that's been recruiting Malachi this whole time as well. So that makes a big difference, especially when that coach has guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, to his credit, bringing into college football. So. Very interesting dynamic, and I'm going to go see Malachi play tomorrow night. Actually, he was back. He was hurt week 2, and he was back last week. So he's playing Lincoln Northeast tomorrow evening. So I will be out there, and I was kind of thinking in my mind earlier. I was thinking about it, and I was wondering if he would even want to do an interview after the game, because he's holding things really close to the vest right now. He didn't even come out pregame last week against Georgia Southern because he didn't want the media talking to him or seeing him. I'm not sure why, but he's kind of clammed up here lately. And I mean, he's a Lincoln East kid. I went to Lincoln East, and he's got a very strong family support system that all love the University of Nebraska very, very much. So it's going to be hard to get Malachi out of Nebraska, but if anybody can do it, Oklahoma can, in my opinion.
Greg Peterson, HuskerOnline.com, and a Husker Online video right here on YouTube. Greg, I'm going to need to see you next Tuesday at 6 Central. How about that?
Sounds good. I think I don't have anything else going on at that time.
You haven't for the last 150 weeks or so, whatever it is at this point. But yeah. Greg and I get together for Nebraska Live on our Nebraska channel every Tuesday at 6 Central. So you Oklahoma fans interested in Nebraska football, just as much college football talk as you can get, join Greg and I over there. Greg, appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the ball game on Saturday.
I will. You guys do the same.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Appreciate Greg stopping by for a Nebraska look. The rivalry is still intact, and of course, the storylines flying all over the place with the added narrative of the coaching transition at Nebraska. All right, Jason, anything else before we wrap it up here?
No, I'm just looking forward to the game. It'll be a one, I think, regardless. I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of hype between an Oklahoma and a Nebraska game, and then there's a lot of different circumstances surrounding the game this year. So, ready to see it start here on the big noon kickoff on Saturday.
All right, folks, you can catch Jason after the game right here on the Oklahoma channel directly after the game. Jason's got post-game for you live. He'll answer your comments and questions. We'll be back here next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time on our Sooners live show. We appreciate everybody stopping by, bringing your comments and questions, and we will see you back here next week. Bring a friend or 50, and we'll do it again.